The stagecoach lurched to a stop, kicking up a cloud of red dust that settled on everything like a curse. Lila Monroe pressed her face against the grimy window, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. After 3 days of bone-rattling travel from Missouri, she had finally arrived in Silver Creek, New Mexico territory. She smoothed down her best dress, a faded blue cotton that had seen better days, and adjusted the small cameo brooch at her throat. It had been her mother's, the only thing of value she possessed. Everything else she owned fit into the worn carpetbag at her feet. "Silver Creek," the driver hollered. "All out for Silver Creek." Lila gathered her courage along with her meager belongings. This was it, the new life she'd gambled everything on. Somewhere in this dusty frontier town, Mr. Harrison Blackwood was waiting for her, the man who'd promised her marriage, respectability, and a life far removed from the squalor of the St. Louis tenements where she'd grown up. The letters had painted such a picture: a successful merchant, a fine house with real glass windows, Sunday dinners with the town's respectable folk. After years of taking in laundry until her hands cracked and bled. After watching her mother die of consumption in a room no bigger than a closet. Lila had answered the advertisement for a mail-order bride like it was salvation itself. She stepped down from the coach, squinting in the harsh afternoon sun. The town stretched before her in a collection of weathered buildings and false-fronted stores. Men in dusty clothes lounged outside the saloon, their eyes tracking her movement with interest that made her skin crawl. But where was Mr. Blackwood? She stood beside the coach as other passengers dispersed, clutching her carpetbag with white knuckles. The driver was already tossing down luggage from the roof, eager to be on his way. "Excuse me," she called to him. "I'm expecting someone to meet me." "Mr. Harrison Blackwood?" The driver spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Blackwood? The merchant?" He gave her a look that made her stomach turn to lead. "Lady, Harrison Blackwood's been married to the banker's daughter for near about 2 years now." The world tilted. Lila gripped the side of the coach to keep from falling. That's not possible. I have letters. He sent money for passage." A harsh laugh came from the direction of the saloon. A woman in a low-cut red dress sauntered over. Her painted face cracked with amusement. "Another one of Harry's little games. Honey, you ain't the first and you won't be the last. He likes to string along desperate girls. See how far they'll come." "But he promised." "Men promise lots of things." The woman's expression softened slightly. "You got somewhere to go? Family?" Lila shook her head numbly. She'd sold everything, burned every bridge to come here. There was nothing left back in St. Louis. The woman sighed. "May's Palace is always looking for girls. If you're interested, it ain't respectable, but it's better than starving." Horror flooded through Lila. She understood exactly what kind of establishment May's Palace was. I need to think." She stumbled away from the coach, from the pitying looks and knowing smirks. Her legs carried her to the shabby hotel at the edge of town, where she parted with precious coins for a room. The clerk, a greasy man with wandering eyes, suggested she could earn the money back quick enough if she was accommodating. In the privacy of the dingy room, Lila allowed herself exactly 10 minutes to fall apart. She sobbed into the moldy pillow, mourning not just the betrayal, but the death of hope itself. When the tears finally stopped, she sat up and took inventory. She had 43 cents to her name, a change of clothes, her mother's brooch, and the Colt .31 pocket revolver she'd bought in St. Louis after a man had followed her home from the laundry. As night fell, she ventured out to find food, keeping her head down and hurrying past the saloons where laughter spilled out like whiskey. At the general store, she spent precious pennies on hardtack and jerky, ignoring the shopkeeper's suggestion that a pretty girl like her could eat much better if she was friendly-like. She was heading back to the hotel when they cornered her. 3 men, stinking of whiskey and days without bathing. One of them she recognized, the clerk from the hotel. Well, the little bride who ain't got no groom. His smile was all teeth and malice. "Changed your mind about earning your keep yet? Please, I just want to go to my room." Now that ain't friendly at all. One of the others moved closer. "Harry Blackwood usually sends prettier ones, but you'll do." She understood then with crystal clarity. This was a game to them, to Blackwood, to these men. Lure desperate women out here with promises, then profit from their desperation. How many others had fallen into this trap? When the first man lunged, she was ready. The pistol cleared her pocket, and she fired. The sound was enormous in the alley. The bullet went wide, striking the wall, but it was enough to send them scrambling back. "Crazy witch," the clerk spat, but he was already backing away. "You won't last a week out here. You'll come crawling to Maze, begging for work. They all do." Lila kept the gun raised until they disappeared into the darkness. Then she ran. She made it back to her room, barricaded the door with the rickety chair, and sat on the bed with the pistol in her lap. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the building, every drunken shout from the street made her grip the gun tighter. When the first pale light of dawn crept through the cracked window, she knew she couldn't stay. They'd be back, with more men, with a sheriff who'd take their side because that's how it worked in places like this. She packed her few belongings, pinned her mother's brooch inside her bodice where it wouldn't be seen, and slipped out of the hotel. At the livery stable, she traded her mother's wedding ring, the last thing she'd sworn never to sell, for an old mare and directions out of town. "Where you headed, miss?" the stable hand asked, not unkindly. "Away from here." He studied her for a moment, then leaned in conspiratorially. "You take the North Trail. Follow it 2 days to Wagon Road. There's a trading post there, run by a Mexican named Santos. He's honest folk, won't ask questions. Could help you find work or safe passage further on." "Thank you. One more thing." He glanced around nervously. "Stay clear of Holt Ridge if you value your life. That's wild country. And there's a man up there, well, they say he don't take kindly to visitors. Lost his mind in the war. Maybe just give it a wide berth." Lila nodded. Though privately she thought a madman in the mountains might be preferable to the civilized cruelty of Silver Creek. She rode out as the town was waking, keeping the mare to a steady walk to conserve her strength. The landscape changed from dusty streets to scrubland, then to pine-dotted hills that rose like waves frozen in stone. By noon, the sun was a hammer beating down on her head, and she regretted not buying a proper hat. Late in the afternoon, with Silver Creek far behind and the trail winding higher into rough country, disaster struck. The mare, already old and tired, stumbled on loose shale. Lila tried to hold on, but the world spun, and she found herself tumbling down a rocky slope in a confusion of dust and pain. When the world stopped spinning, she lay gasping at the bottom of a shallow ravine. Her right ankle blazed with pain, and blood seeped through a tear in her skirt where she'd scraped against the rocks. The mare was visible above, grazing placidly as if nothing had happened. It took her an hour to climb back up, every movement sending spikes of agony through her ankle. But the mare had wandered off, leaving her stranded in the middle of nowhere with night approaching fast. Panic clawed at her throat. She'd die out here, and no one would ever know what became of Lila Monroe. Just another failed mail-order bride who vanished into the wilderness? No, she hadn't come this far to give up now. Leaning heavily on a branch she'd found, she limped north, following what might have been a deer trail. The sun was setting, painting the mountains blood red. When she smelled smoke, hope and fear warred in her chest. People meant possible help, but they also meant potential danger. Still, what choice did she have? She followed the smoke smell through a stand of pines and found herself looking down at a modest homestead nestled in a valley. A cabin built of logs and stone, a barn, a corral with a few horses. Smoke curled from the chimney in a way that spoke of warmth and food. And then she saw him. A man emerged from the barn, carrying a bucket. Even from a distance, she could see he walked with a pronounced limp, favoring his left leg. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting. He moved with the careful efficiency of someone accustomed to solitude, to relying only on himself. This must be the madman of Holt Ridge. Lila watched him tend to his horses, noted the way he spoke softly to them, the gentle way he checked their hooves. Whatever else he might be, he wasn't cruel to animals. That had to count for something. She could approach him, throw herself on his mercy, but the memory of Silver Creek was too fresh, the betrayal too raw. Men promised help and delivered harm. Men smiled while planning your destruction. Her hand found the pistol in her pocket. A desperate plan formed in her mind. She needed food, medical supplies for her ankle, a horse, and time to figure out her next move. This hermit had all of those things, and if the townsfolk were afraid of him, they wouldn't come looking here. It was madness. But then, her whole life had become madness from the moment she'd stepped off that stagecoach. She waited until full dark, until the lamplight in the cabin window suggested he was settling in for the evening. Then she crept closer, fighting to control her breathing, to steady her shaking hands. The cabin door wasn't locked. Of course not. Who would he need to lock out in this wilderness? She pushed it open slowly, wincing at the small creak. The interior was simple but clean. A stone fireplace, a rough table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and him, sitting in a chair by the fire, a book in his hands. He looked up, more curious than alarmed at first. His face was weathered but younger than she'd expected, marked by lines that spoke of pain endured rather than years lived. "Ma'am," his voice was deep, roughened by disuse. "Are you lost? Hurt?" For a moment, her resolve wavered. There was no threat in his tone, only concern. Then she remembered Harrison Blackwood's letters. How sincere they'd seemed on paper. She raised the pistol, trying to keep it steady despite her trembling. "Don't move! I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." His eyes widened, but he stayed perfectly still, his hands careful, remaining visible. "All right, take it easy. Whatever you need, we can work this out." "Food," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Medical supplies, and a horse. I need a horse." He studied her in the firelight, taking in her torn dress, the blood on her skirt, the way she swayed on her feet. "You're hurt. That's none of your concern. It is if you pass out and that gun goes off." His voice remained calm, steady. "Why don't you sit down before you fall down? Whatever trouble you're running from, it can wait 5 minutes." "I said don't move!" "I'm not moving, but you are about to fall over. And when you do, that trigger finger might slip. Neither of us wants that." He was right. The room was starting to spin, her ankles screaming in protest. But she couldn't show weakness. Not again. Never again. "I'm taking what I need," she said, trying to sound fierce. "And you're going to let me, or... The words died in her throat as the room tilted violently. The last thing she saw was him rising from his chair, concern written across his weathered features. Then darkness claimed her, and she fell into nothing, still clutching the gun that had become both her salvation and her damnation. Lila woke to warmth and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she forgot where she was, lost in the simple comfort of being horizontal on something soft. Then memory crashed back. The gun, the man, her failed attempt at robbery. She jerked upright, immediately regretting it as pain lanced through her ankle. She was lying on a narrow bed in what appeared to be a small side room. Her boots had been removed, her injured ankle wrapped in clean bandages. A quilt covered her, hand-stitched with a pattern of interlocking rings. The pistol was gone. Panic surged through her as she swung her legs over the side of the bed, testing her weight. The door was open and she could hear movement in the main room. He hadn't locked her in. Why hadn't he locked her in? Using the wall for support. She limped to the doorway. The man, her erstwhile hostage, sat at the table, her pistol disassembled before him. He was cleaning it with practiced efficiency. "That's mine," she said, her voice hoarse. He looked up, unsurprised by her appearance. "It is, and it's in terrible condition. When's the last time you cleaned it?" The mundane question threw her off balance. What does that matter?" "Matters if you're planning to threaten folks with it. A dirty gun can misfire, hurt you worse than whoever you're aiming at. He reassembled the weapon with quick, sure movements. Sit down before you undo all my work on that ankle. You doctored me? Seemed the Christian thing to do, seeing as how you fainted before you could rob me proper. There was the slightest hint of amusement in his tone. Coffee's hot if you want some. This was all wrong. He should be angry. Should have tied her up. Called the sheriff. Instead, he was offering coffee like she was a neighbor come to visit. Why? She asked. Why what? Why didn't I leave you to bleed on my floor? Why didn't I ride to town for the law? He shrugged. First answer is, I'm not a monster. Second is that Silver Creek is 2 days' ride, and I haven't been there in near 3 years. Don't intend to start now. He knew where she'd come from. Of course he did. It was the nearest town, the only place she could have traveled from. Are you going to turn me in? For what? Fainting in my cabin? He slid the cleaned pistol across the table toward her. Take it if it makes you feel safer. But I'd appreciate it if you'd stop pointing it at me. Makes it hard to have a civilized conversation. Lila stared at the gun, then at him. Nothing about this made sense. She picked up the weapon, checked that he'd reassembled it correctly. He had, and tucked it back in her pocket. I need food, she said, trying to recapture some semblance of control. And a horse. You need that ankle looked at by someone who knows more than basic field medicine. You need rest. And you need to eat something before you keel over again. He stood, moving to the stove with that pronounced limp she'd noticed before. But we can start with food. I can pay. The lie tasted bitter. Once I get where I'm going. Sure you can. He didn't even try to sound convinced. Scrambled eggs all right? Haven't got much else at the moment. Supply run's not for another week. Her stomach answered before she could, growling loudly in the quiet cabin. When had she last eaten? The hardtack from Silver Creek seemed like a lifetime ago. He took that as agreement, pulling out a cast-iron skillet. She watched him work, noted the efficient movements despite his bad leg, the way he compensated without seeming to think about it. A war injury. The stable hand had suggested. She could see it now. He moved like the soldiers she'd seen returning to St. Louis, men who'd left pieces of themselves on distant battlefields. What's your name? He asked, not turning from the stove. She hesitated. But what did it matter now? Lila Monroe. Called her Holt. He cracked eggs into the skillet. And before you ask, yes, this is Holt Ridge. Yes, I'm the hermit everyone warns people about. No, I haven't lost my mind and murdered anyone. Well, he amended, not recently. That startled an unexpected laugh from her, quickly stifled. He glanced over his shoulder, and she caught what might have been surprise on his face. There a reason everyone thinks you have? She asked. People need their stories. Makes them feel better about their own lives. I suppose. He divided the eggs onto 2 plates, added thick slices of bread. Easier to paint me as a madman than admit they just don't like being reminded of things they'd rather forget. He set a plate before her, along with a cup of coffee that smelled like heaven. Her hands shook as she picked up the fork. Slow, he cautioned. Been a while since you ate proper, I'm guessing. She wanted to bristle at his presumption, but he was right. The first bite of eggs nearly brought tears to her eyes. Real food, hot and fresh. She forced herself to eat slowly, aware of his eyes on her. Mail-order bride? He asked after a moment. The fork clattered to her plate. How did you... Not many reasons a woman travels alone to Silver Creek. Fewer still for why she'd leave in such a hurry. His expression was neutral. No judgment in it. Harrison Blackwood? Heat flooded her cheeks. Was her humiliation that obvious? You know him? Know of him. He's pulled that scheme 4 or 5 times now. Town council turns a blind eye because his wife's father holds most of the loans. He took a sip of coffee. You're lucky you got out when you did. Lucky. The word tasted like ashes. Yes, very lucky. More than you know. The last girl who fell for his letters? He trailed off, shaking his head. Well, you made the right choice. Running. They ate in silence after that. Lila tried to reconcile this calm, matter-of-fact man with the crazed hermit of local legend. He seemed entirely too normal, too steady. Although there was something in his eyes, a weight that spoke of things seen and survived. When she finished, he cleared the plates without comment. She watched him move about the small space, noted how he favored his left leg, how certain movements made him pause almost imperceptibly. "How long?" she asked. He knew what she meant. 6 years. Took grape shot at Antietam. Surgeons wanted to take the leg, but I was stubborn. Kept it, but it doesn't work quite right. He dried the plates with mechanical precision. "Makes ranch work interesting. Is that why you live out here alone?" "Part of it." He put the plates away, then turned to face her. "Now, Miss Monroe, let's discuss your situation. You tried to rob me. I was desperate. I gathered that. You're hurt, alone, and running from trouble. You've got no money, no horse, and nowhere to go." Each word was another weight on her chest. "I'll figure something out. I always do, I'm sure. But right now, you can barely walk. That ankle needs at least a week before you should ride. Longer if you want it to heal proper." "I can't stay here a week." "Why? Someone chasing you? Besides Blackwood's bruised ego?" She thought of the men in the alley. Their threats. Maybe. He studied her for a long moment. "Here's what I propose. You stay until you can travel safely. Help out with what chores you can manage, cooking, mending, such like. When you're healed, I'll give you supplies and directions to wherever you want to go. Fair trade, no debt between us." "Why would you do that?" "Because sending you out there half-crippled would be murder, and I've got enough blood on my hands." His voice went flat on the last words. "Because sometimes people need help, and I'm in a position to give it. Don't make it more complicated than it is." She wanted to refuse, to maintain her independence, but the throbbing in her ankle reminded her of reality. She had nowhere else to go. "I still don't trust you," she said. "Good, that'll keep you safe." He moved to a trunk in the corner, pulled out blankets and a pillow. "You can have the bed. I'll take the floor out here." "I can't take your bed." "You can and you will. That ankle needs to be elevated." He laid out the blankets with military precision. "Privy's out back. There's a chamber pot under the bed if you can't make it that far." "Questions?" She had 1,000 questions, but none she could voice. "No. Get some rest. We'll figure out the details tomorrow." She retreated to the small bedroom, closed the door, and sank onto the bed. Through the thin wood, she could hear him settling in for the night, the creak of floorboards, the dying crackle of the fire. She'd tried to rob him, and he'd bandaged her wounds. She'd pointed a gun at him, and he'd made her eggs. Nothing about Calder Holt made sense. Her hand found the pistol in her pocket, its weight both comforting and damning. She'd crossed a line today, become someone she didn't recognize, but she was alive, and for now, that had to be enough. Over the next days, they developed an awkward rhythm. Calder rose before dawn to tend the horses, leaving coffee hot on the stove. Lila hobbled about the cabin, trying to make herself useful despite her injury. She mended a pile of clothes he'd apparently been ignoring for months, organized his meager pantry, and attempted to cook meals with varying degrees of success. He was unfailingly polite, but distant, speaking only when necessary. She learned he ran a small horse operation, breeding and training mounts for the Army Remount Service. The work was hard for a man with 2 good legs, harder still for one who walked like every step cost him. On the 3rd day, she watched from the window as he worked with a young stallion, patient despite the horse's skittishness. The animal reared, nearly striking him, and he simply stepped aside with that awkward grace born of long practice. "You're going to get yourself killed," she said when he came in for lunch. "Possibly." He poured water from a pitcher, washing dust from his face. "But it's honest work. Lonely work. That too." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Speaking of which, you might want to avoid the windows. Sometimes hunters pass through this area. Wouldn't want them getting the wrong idea." The warning chilled her. "You mean they'd think I mean, people talk. A woman staying with the hermit of Holt Ridge? Stories write themselves. That night, she tested the lock on the bedroom door for the first time. It worked, but she could hear him settling onto his makeshift bed in the main room, could track his movements by the creaking floorboards. He never came near her door. On the fourth day, she discovered the locked room. She'd been exploring the cabin while he was out, trying to understand this strange man who'd taken her in. The door was at the back of the cabin, secured with a heavy padlock. Unlike the rest of the tidy space, dust had gathered around its edges. When Calder returned, she was sitting at the table, trying to look innocent. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked mildly. Heat flooded her face. "I wasn't." "It's fine. Natural to be curious." He hung his hat on a peg, ran fingers through sweat-dampened hair. "Nothing in there concerns you. The locked room of the madman of Holt Ridge," she said, trying for lightness. "Very Gothic." His jaw tightened. "Leave it be, Miss Monroe." The first real hint of temper she'd seen from him. She filed that information away, along with everything else she'd observed. The way he sometimes stared at nothing, lost in memories. The careful distance he maintained. The moments when his hands would clench into fists for no apparent reason. That evening, as she heated stew for dinner, the questions became too much. "Why don't you ever go to town?" He was cleaning tack at the table, the leather supple under his hands. "Don't need much. Santos at the trading post handles supplies." "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." He worked oil into the leather with unnecessary force. "Town's full of people who knew me before, who knew my brother, my wife. Easier to stay away than see their faces, their pity, or their blame." Wife. The word hung between them like a challenge. "She died?" Lila asked softly. "While I was away playing soldier. Took her own life rather than wait for me to come home." His hand stilled on the leather. "Can't say I blame her. I came back different than I left." "The war changes men," she offered, inadequate words for an inadequate situation. "That it does, changes women too, the ones left behind." He set the tack aside, fixed her with that unsettling direct gaze. "What about you? What are you running from, besides Blackwood's scheme?" "Nothing. Everything." She stirred the stew to avoid his eyes. "There was nothing left for me in St. Louis. No family, no prospects. Just laundry and loneliness until I died. The advertisement seemed like hope. Hope's dangerous in places like this. I'm learning that." They ate in companionable silence, the earlier tension easing, afterward, as she washed dishes and he worked on ranch accounts. She found herself humming an old hymn her mother used to sing. "You have a nice voice," he said without looking up. She stopped immediately, self-conscious. "Sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't." He made another notation in his ledger. "It's been a long time since there was music in this house." Something in his tone made her chest tight. She resumed humming, softer now, and was rewarded by the slight easing of tension in his shoulders. That night, snow began to fall. She woke to a world transformed, white and silent beyond the windows. Calder was already up, feeding wood to the fire. "Looks like you'll be staying a bit longer," he said. "This storm's been building for days. Could last a week or more." A week. Trapped here with a man she barely knew, dependent on his continued goodwill. The old panic tried to rise, but she forced it down. He'd had plenty of opportunities to hurt her. He hadn't taken them. "I suppose I should earn my keep then," she said with forced lightness. "That pile of mending won't fix itself." Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. "There's fabric in the trunk, if you need it." Rebecca was handy with a needle. Rebecca, his wife's name, offered like a gift or a test. Lila filed it away with all the other pieces of Calder Holt she'd collected. The storm settled over Holt Ridge like a living thing, wind howling around the cabin's corners. They were trapped in their small world of firelight and necessity, two damaged souls circling each other like wary animals. And somewhere in the white silence, something began to shift between them. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. as fragile and beautiful as frost on a window pane. The storm raged for 3 days before settling into a steady, relentless snowfall. By the 4th day, drifts reached halfway up the windows, and the world beyond the cabin had vanished into white. They moved around each other in careful patterns, like dancers who hadn't yet learned the steps. Calder spent his mornings fighting through the snow to tend the horses, returning with ice in his beard and exhaustion in his movements. His limp was worse in the cold, though he tried to hide it. Lila pretended not to notice when he paused to grip the doorframe, breathing through what must have been considerable pain. She kept the fire going, the coffee hot, and threw herself into making the cabin more livable. Years of poverty had taught her to make much from little. She reorganized his stores, mended everything she could find, and experimented with the limited ingredients to create something more than the basic fare he'd been surviving on. "You don't have to do all this," he said one afternoon, watching her fashion curtains from an old sheet. "I need to be useful." She didn't look at him, focusing on her stitching. "I can't stand being idle." "I understand that." He settled into his chair with a book, but she could feel him watching her over the pages. That evening, as they ate a stew she'd managed to make almost flavorful, the conversation turned to books. She'd noticed his small collection, worn volumes of poetry, agricultural guides, and, surprisingly, a few novels. "Rebecca loved to read," he said, running his finger along the spine of a volume of Wordsworth. "I kept her books, though I don't look at them much." "Why not?" "Seems like trespassing. Somehow, reading words she'll never read again." The raw honesty of it made her chest tight. "I think she'd want them read. Books are meant to be alive, to be shared." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them that made her hands tremble. "Maybe you're right. Would you read something? Aloud, I mean, the quiet gets heavy sometimes." So she read to him from Wordsworth while the snow fell and the fire crackled. His eyes closed, but she knew he wasn't sleeping by the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the arms of his chair during certain passages. Days blended together in the snowbound cabin. They developed routines within routines. Morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, the careful dance of two people learning to exist in the same space. Evening conversations that grew longer, deeper. "Tell me about St. Louis," he said one night. So she did. She told him about the narrow streets, the smell of lye and starch, the way her hands had cracked and bled in winter, about her mother's slow fade from consumption, about 16-hour days that barely kept them fed. "Is that why you answered the advertisement? Desperation makes fools of us all." She stared into the fire. "I thought anything would be better than dying slowly in those tenements. I was wrong." "No," he said quietly. "You weren't wrong to hope. Blackwood was wrong to prey on that hope. I pointed a gun at you." She reminded him. "What does that make me?" "Desperate, scared, human." He shifted in his chair, and she caught the grimace of pain he tried to hide. "I've done worse for better reasons, or what seemed like better reasons at the time." She wanted to ask about the war, about what had carved those lines into his face. Instead, she said, "Your leg's worse in the cold." "It's fine." "It's not." She stood, decision made. "I know some liniment techniques. My mother worked for a doctor before." She trailed off. "Let me help." "Lila, you've helped me. Let me return the favor." The use of her first name stopped her cold. He'd been careful to call her Miss Monroe, maintaining that formal distance. Now he looked at her with something like vulnerability. "It's not pretty," he warned. "Neither is my ankle." After a long moment, he nodded. She heated water while he rolled up his trouser leg, revealing the mass of scar tissue that ran from knee to ankle. "Grape shot," he'd said. She could see where multiple projectiles had torn through muscle and flesh. She kept her expression neutral as she worked, warming the damaged tissue with hot cloths before carefully massaging the rigid scars. He held himself perfectly still, but she heard the sharp intake of breath when she hit particularly sensitive spots. "Tell me if I hurt you," she said, You're not. His voice was rough. It's been a long time since anyone... He didn't finish the sentence. She worked in silence after that, aware of the intimacy of the moment. When she finished, he caught her hand before she could pull away. Thank you. Two simple words that carried weight that night. She lay awake listening to the wind, thinking about the way his hand had felt on hers. Warm, calloused, gentle. The next morning brought a brief break in the storm. Calder announced he needed to check on the horses in the far pasture, the ones he hadn't been able to reach for days. I'll come with you, Lila said. Your ankle is much better, and you might need help. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Bundle up then. It's brutal out there. She wrapped herself in layers of his spare clothes, swimming in garments made for a man twice her size. He tried not to smile at the sight of her and failed. The world outside was transformed, beautiful and deadly. Snow had drifted into fantastic shapes, and ice hung from the eaves like nature's chandelier. They waded through hip-deep snow, Calder breaking trail while she followed in his footsteps. The horses were huddled in the shelter of some pines, shaggy with winter coat but otherwise fine, while Calder checked them over and distributed feed. Lila explored the small grove. That's when she saw them. Wolf tracks, fresh, circling the area. Calder, she called softly. He was beside her immediately, reading the story in the snow. They're hungry. Storm's driven the deer down to lower elevation. Will they attack the horses? Possibly. We'll need to bring them closer to the barn. He scanned the tree line, hand moving automatically to the rifle on his shoulder. Stay close. They worked together to herd the horses back through the snow. Lila had never handled horses much, but she found they responded to her quiet voice and steady movements. One mare, heavily pregnant, seemed to adopt her, following placidly wherever she led. You're a natural, Calder observed. They're not so different from people, she said, stroking the mare's neck. They just want kindness and understanding. They were almost back to the barn when the wolves appeared. 3 of them, gaunt with hunger, emerged from the trees like gray ghosts. The horses snorted and shied, but Calder stepped forward, rifle raised. Easy, he said, though whether to the horses or the wolves, Lila couldn't tell. Get them inside. She didn't argue, urging the horses through the barn door while he stood guard. The wolves didn't attack, but they didn't retreat either, watching with hungry yellow eyes. Once the horses were secure, Calder backed slowly toward the barn. One wolf, bolder than the others, took a step forward. Calder fired into the air, the sound enormous in the snowy silence. The wolves vanished back into the forest. Inside the barn, warm with animal heat and sweet with hay, Lila found herself shaking. Not from fear, she realized, but from the aftermath of danger shared. You all right? Calder asked, setting the rifle aside. Yes, you? Fine. You did good out there. Kept your head. I had a good example to follow. They were standing close in the dim barn, and she was suddenly aware of him in a way that made her breath catch. The broad shoulders, the steady strength despite his injury, the way he'd put himself between her and danger without hesitation. He seemed to feel it too, the shift in the air between them. He took a step back, clearing his throat. We should get inside. Storm's picking up again. That night, the tension was palpable. They went through their evening routines, but everything felt charged with unspoken possibility. When she handed him his coffee, their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away immediately. Lila, he said finally, staring into the fire. What happened today? You protected me, protected us. That's not what I mean. He set down his cup, ran a hand through his hair. I've been alone a long time. By choice. It's better that way. Safer for everyone. Safer for you, you mean? He looked at her sharply. You don't know what you're saying. Don't I? She moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. You're not the only one who's been alone. Calder. Not the only one who's built walls. Your walls make sense. Mine. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. There's a reason people call me mad. After Rebecca, after Thomas died in my arms at Chancellorsville, something broke in me. I'm not fit company for anyone, least of all someone like you. Someone like me? She laughed, bitter. A failed mail-order bride who tried to rob you? A survivor, he corrected, turning to face her. A woman who's maintained her dignity despite everything. You deserve better than a broken-down soldier hiding from the world. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Outside, the storm howled its fury, but inside the cabin, the only sound was their breathing. What if I don't want better? She asked quietly. What if I just want to be warm and safe and not alone for once in my life? He crossed to her then, moving with purpose despite his limp. His hands framed her face, calloused thumbs gentle against her cheeks. You don't know what you're asking. Then show me. The kiss was desperate, hungry. Years of loneliness poured into the contact. She gripped his shoulders, anchoring herself as the world spun. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw wonder in his eyes. Lila, he said again, her name a prayer and a question, but the moment shattered as quickly as it had formed. He pulled away, stepping back as if burned. This is wrong. You're under my protection. I won't take advantage. You're not, she said fiercely. I'm not some innocent girl. Calder, I know my own mind. Do you? You've been through trauma. You're dependent on me for shelter. Stop. The word cracked like a whip. Don't you dare make this about my weakness. I've survived things that would break most people. I'm here because I choose to be, not because I have nowhere else to go. It wasn't entirely true. She did have nowhere else. But in that moment, it felt true. She was here because something in this lonely man called to something in her. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'm sorry. You're right. I shouldn't presume to know your mind. No, she agreed. You shouldn't. They stood there, the gulf between them suddenly vast despite the small space. Finally, Calder moved to his makeshift bed. It's late. We should sleep. Lila retreated to the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. She pressed her fingers to her lips, still feeling the heat of his kiss, the rasp of his beard. Through the door, she could hear him settling in for the night, the rustle of blankets, the creak of floorboards. She lay in his bed, and when had she started thinking of it as his bed rather than the bed, and stared at the ceiling? Everything had changed in the space of a kiss. The careful balance they'd maintained was broken, and she didn't know if it could be repaired. But perhaps, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, some things needed to break before they could be rebuilt. Perhaps that's what healing looked like, messy and painful and uncertain, but ultimately necessary. The storm continued to rage outside, sealing them in their small world, and somewhere in the darkness, two broken souls lay awake, separated by a thin wooden door and the thick walls of their own fears, each wondering if the other was worth the risk of hoping again. The morning after their kiss dawned cold and awkward. They moved around each other like guilty strangers, careful not to touch, barely speaking beyond the necessary. The easy companionship of the past days had vanished, replaced by a tension that made the small cabin feel even smaller. Lila threw herself into work with desperate energy. She scrubbed the already clean floors, reorganized the already tidy shelves, and cooked elaborate meals from their simple stores. Anything to avoid meeting his eyes, to avoid acknowledging what had passed between them. Calder, for his part, spent more time than necessary in the barn. She could see him through the window, working with grim determination despite the bitter cold. He was fixing things that didn't need fixing, wearing himself out to avoid being in the cabin with her. This continued for 2 days before Lila's patience snapped. This is ridiculous, she announced when he came in for the noon meal, speaking to his back as he hung up his coat. He stiffened but didn't turn. What is? You know what? We're acting like children. I'm trying to be respectful. You're trying to pretend nothing happened. She set down the pot with more force than necessary. Well, something did happen, and ignoring it won't make it go away. He finally turned to face her, and she was struck by how tired he looked. What do you want me to say, Lila? That I've been thinking about kissing you since the moment you pointed that gun at me? That having you here has made me feel alive for the first time in years? That I lie awake at night knowing you're just beyond that door and it takes everything in me not to... He cut himself off, jaw clenching. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. Yes, she said quietly. That's exactly what I want you to say. Why? The word came out rough, almost angry. So you can feel better about your own confusion? So we can pretend there's something here worth pursuing when we both know you'll leave the moment the snow clears? The accusation stung because it held truth. She had been planning to leave, had been counting the days until her ankle healed and the weather broke. But somewhere along the way, that plan had become less certain. Maybe I don't want to leave, she said. You don't mean that. Stop telling me what I mean. The words exploded from her. Everyone my whole life has told me what I should think, what I should feel, what I should want. For once, just once, I'd like to decide for myself. He studied her for a long moment, then moved to the table, sitting down heavily. All right, tell me what you want. She sat across from him, gathering her courage. I want to stop pretending that I don't feel safe here for the first time since my mother died. I want to stop acting like your laugh doesn't make my chest feel warm. I want... She paused, then pushed forward. I want to know what's in that locked room. His face shuddered immediately. That's not... You want honesty? Truth? It has to go both ways. Calder, I've told you my shames, my failures, but you're still hiding behind that door. Some doors should stay closed, even from me, especially from you. He stood abruptly. I need to check on the horses. He was gone before she could respond, leaving his untouched meal cooling on the table. That evening, she woke from a fitful doze to the sound of distress. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then she recognized the human voice within it, Calder, caught in the grip of a nightmare. She found him thrashing on his makeshift bed, blankets twisted around him like bonds. His face was contorted with anguish, and he was calling a name. Thomas! Without thinking, she knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Calder! Calder! Wake up! You're safe! His eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. For a moment, he didn't seem to recognize her. Then awareness crashed back, and with it, a shame that made her heart ache. I'm sorry, he said, struggling to sit up. I didn't mean to wake you. Don't apologize. She didn't move away, could feel him trembling beneath her hand. How often? Most nights. He rubbed his face, trying to compose himself. It's worse in winter. The cold brings it back. Your brother? He nodded, not trusting his voice. Tell me, she said softly. Sometimes it helps to speak it aloud. For a long moment, she thought he would refuse. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he began to speak. Thomas was 2 years younger, always following me around, always wanting to be just like his big brother. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. When I enlisted, he begged to come too. Our parents forbade it. He was only 17, but he ran away, lied about his age, showed up in my regiment 2 weeks later. Lila remained silent, letting the story unfold. I should have sent him home, should have dragged him back myself, but I was proud, stupid, thought I could protect him. His hands clenched into fists. Chancellorsville was chaos. Smoke so thick you couldn't see 10 feet. We got separated from our unit. Then the shelling started. She could see it in his eyes, the memory playing out in vivid detail. He was 20 feet from me when the shell hit, just 20 feet. His voice broke. Took me an hour to crawl to him through the mud and bodies. Pieces of him were... He stopped, unable to continue. Oh, Calder. She moved without thinking, gathering him against her as she would a hurt child. He resisted for a moment, then collapsed into her embrace, his body shaking with suppressed sobs. He died, calling for our mother. he whispered against her shoulder. Died because I failed to protect him, because I let him follow me to war. You were barely more than a boy yourself, she murmured, stroking his hair. It wasn't your fault. Tell that to my parents. They never forgave me. Rightfully so. They stayed like that for long minutes, her holding him as years of guilt and grief poured out. When the storm finally passed, he pulled back, embarrassed. Now you see why I live alone, he said, not meeting her eyes. Why it's better, she silenced him with a finger to his lips. What I see is a man who loved his brother, who carries wounds that never properly healed because he's been alone with them too long. Lila, I'm not going anywhere tonight, she said firmly. You need sleep, real sleep, and you won't get it on this hard floor. Before he could protest, she helped him to his feet, guided him to the bedroom. He was too exhausted, too emotionally drained to fight her. She settled him into the bed, pulled the quilts up to his chin. Stay, he said, catching her hand as she turned to go. Please, I don't want to be alone tonight. She hesitated only a moment before sliding under the quilts beside him, fully clothed. He curled into her, this strong, broken man, and she held him as the wind howled outside. Somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, she woke to find their positions reversed. His arm was around her waist, holding her close against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, could feel the moment he woke, his body tensing as he realized their position. Don't, she whispered when he started to pull away. Please don't. He relaxed incrementally, his breath warm against her neck. This is dangerous, he murmured. Everything worth having is dangerous. His arm tightened around her, and they lay in the gray dawn light, neither speaking, both afraid to break whatever spell had been woven in the darkness. When full daylight finally forced them from bed, something fundamental had shifted. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a tender awareness. They moved around each other with new care, hands brushing as they passed, eyes meeting and holding. After breakfast, Calder disappeared into the barn and returned with a key. You were right, he said, voice carefully neutral. No more locked doors between us. The room, when he opened it, was a shrine to grief. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser with a woman's brush and mirror still laid out, dried flowers in a vase on the windowsill, everything covered in dust, frozen in time. Rebecca couldn't bear the loneliness. Calder said from the doorway. I'd been gone 2 years, with 2 more to go. The other women in town tried to help, but she was delicate, always had been. The isolation broke her. Lila moved into the room, drawn to a photograph on the dresser. A young woman with gentle eyes and a tentative smile. She was beautiful, Lila said. She was, and kind. Too kind for this harsh place. He picked up a small leather journal from the nightstand. She left a note, said she couldn't wake up one more morning to emptiness, couldn't pretend one more day that I was coming home the same man who left. But you did come home. 3 months after they buried her. His voice was flat. Found out from the minister. He was waiting at the stage. Thought someone should tell me, gentle-like, as if there was a gentle way to say your wife chose death over waiting for you. Lila turned from the photograph to face him. It wasn't about you. Depression, despair. They're illnesses, not choices. Maybe doesn't change the end result. He set down the journal with infinite care. I've kept this room locked for 3 years. Couldn't bear to change anything. Couldn't bear to leave it either. And now, he looked at her, and she saw decision in his eyes. Now I think it's time to let her rest, to let myself rest. They spent the afternoon cleaning the room together, packing away Rebecca's belongings with respectful care, opening windows to let in fresh air and light. Lila found herself thinking of the woman who'd lived here, loved here, despaired here. Another soul broken by loneliness and circumstance. As the sun set, painting the newly cleaned room in gold and rose. Calder stood in the doorway one last time. Thank you, he said simply. For what? for making me brave enough to open this door, to face this." He turned to her, and his eyes were clear for the first time since she'd known him. "For reminding me that the past doesn't have to own the future." She went to him then, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. His arms came around her naturally, as if they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. "I'm falling in love with you," he said against her hair. "I know it's too fast, too complicated, too everything, but I needed you to know, in case—" She pulled back to look at him. "In case what?" "In case you decide to leave when the snow clears. In case this is all we have." "Calder Holt," she said firmly. "I tried to rob you at gunpoint. I've slept in your bed, worn your clothes, eaten your food. I've held you through nightmares and seen your darkest corners. Do you really think I'm the kind of woman who does all that lightly?" "I don't know what kind of woman you are," he admitted. "I only know I want to spend the rest of my life finding out." This time, when they kissed, there was no desperation in it, only promise, only possibility. The kiss of two people who had found something unexpected in the wilderness, not just shelter from the storm, but home. That night, Lila made a decision. When the snow cleared, when the world opened up again, she wouldn't run. She'd found something here worth staying for, worth fighting for. In the morning, she'd tell him. But for tonight, she held him close as the wind sang through the pines and let herself believe in the impossible gift of second chances. The snow began to melt on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after Lila had first arrived at Holt Ridge. She stood at the window watching rivulets of water run down from the roof, each drop a reminder that the world beyond their sanctuary still existed. "Spring's coming early," Calder said from behind her. She felt, rather than saw him approach, had learned the particular rhythm of his uneven gait. "Another week, maybe 2, and the trails will be passable." Neither of them mentioned what that meant. They'd existed in a careful bubble of present tense, avoiding discussions of future plans or past obligations. But the melting snow was a clock they couldn't stop. Their quiet morning was shattered by the sound of horses approaching. Calder tensed immediately, moving to the rifle mounted by the door. "Stay inside," he ordered, the gentleman of recent days replaced by the soldier. Through the window, Lila counted 6 riders picking their way through the slushy snow. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the lead figure, Marshal Pete Donnelly from Silver Creek, wearing his badge like a declaration of war. "Calder Holt," Donnelly called out. "Need to have a word with you about a missing woman." Calder stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. "Marshal, long ride from town. Coffee? This ain't a social call." "Holt." Donnelly's eyes swept the property. "Had a report of a woman gone missing from Silver Creek. Desperate type, they say. Armed and dangerous. Trail led this direction. Lots of trails lead lots of directions in these mountains. Don't play games with me, hermit. We know she's here. Jameson at the trading post saw a woman's things when you picked up supplies last week." Lila's mind raced. Calder had gone to the trading post? He'd risked exposure for her needs without saying a word about it. "Since when is giving shelter to someone in need a crime?" Calder asked mildly. "Since that someone assaulted 3 upstanding citizens and stole a horse." "I never stole," Lila began hotly, then caught herself, but it was too late. Donnelly's sharp ears had caught her voice. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step outside. Slowly now." Lila looked at Calder through the window. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. She smoothed her skirts, Rebecca's skirts, altered to fit, and stepped onto the porch with as much dignity as she could muster. "Miss Monroe," Donnelly said with false courtesy, "you've led us quite a chase. I wasn't aware I was running from anything. Marshal, I left Silver Creek of my own free will, after threatening several citizens with a firearm. And there's the matter of the horse." "What horse?" Lila interrupted. "I traded my mother's ring fair and square to Jack Paulson at the livery. He gave me that old mare. She ran off when I fell. That's not how Paulson tells it." "Then Paulson's a liar as well as a cheat." One of the other riders laughed. "Feisty thing, ain't she? Can see why Blackwood wanted—" "That's enough, Carter." Donnelly cut him off. But the damage was done. "This is about Blackwood. Isn't it? Lila said, understanding flooding through her. He's embarrassed that his latest victim didn't play along quietly. Now see here, Donnelly began, but Calder interrupted. Marshal, what exactly are the charges against Miss Monroe? Assault, theft, moral turpitude. Moral turpitude, Lila laughed bitterly. For refusing to become a prostitute when the marriage I was promised turned out to be a lie. You can tell your story to Judge Morrison back in Silver Creek. The hell she will. Calder's voice had gone deadly quiet. He'd shifted position slightly, the rifle now pointed in the general direction of the riders. Miss Monroe is under my protection. You want to add harboring a fugitive to your list of peculiarities. Holt? I want you to get off my land. Tension crackled in the air. 6 armed men against 1 crippled veteran. But something in Calder's stance suggested those weren't odds he feared. Be reasonable, Holt. Donnelly tried again. You don't even know this woman. Why risk? I know enough. Calder's free hand found Lila's, squeezed gently. I know she came here hurt and desperate. I know she's worked herself raw trying to earn her keep. I know she's got more courage in her little finger than all of Blackwood's cronies combined. You planning to shoot it out with the law over some mail-order bride? I'm planning to marry her. The words hung in the crisp morning air. Lila's breath caught. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't planned it, but Calder continued steadily. Miss Monroe has agreed to be my wife. We're waiting for the circuit preacher next month. That makes her my intended, my responsibility, and my business, not yours. Donnelly's face had gone red. You can't just, I can and I am, now, unless you have legal papers, signed by a real judge and not one of Blackwood's bought men. I suggest you head back to Silver Creek. This ain't over. Holt, you've made yourself an enemy today. I've got plenty of those already. One more won't keep me up nights. The marshal wheeled his horse around, his men following reluctantly. Carter called back over his shoulder, Enjoy your whore, hermit. Won't be long before she runs off with whatever you got. Calder's rifle swung toward him, but Lila caught his arm. Don't, he's not worth it. They watched until the riders disappeared into the trees. Then Calder slowly lowered the weapon. His hands were shaking. Marriage? Lila said quietly. I'm sorry. I should have asked first, but she silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her fear and relief and growing love into the contact. When they broke apart, both were breathless. Yes, she said simply. Yes. To the marriage, to staying, to whatever comes next. She touched his face, feeling the tension there. But Calder, what have we done? They'll be back. Let them come. He pulled her close, resting his chin on her hair. I've been hiding up here for 3 years. Lila, hiding from grief, from guilt, from life itself. You've woken me up, made me remember what it feels like to have something worth fighting for. I won't be the cause of. The only thing you're the cause of is me feeling alive again. Whatever happens next, it's my choice, our choice. They went inside, barricading the door as a precaution. The peaceful bubble had burst, replaced by the urgent need to prepare for whatever came next. Tell me about Blackwood, Calder said as they worked. Everything. So she did, leaving out nothing. The letters that had seemed so sincere, the promises of a prosperous life, the reality of arriving to find him married, the whole thing a cruel entertainment for Board. Wealthy men. He has influence, she concluded. Money. The marshal clearly answers to him. In Silver Creek, maybe, but there are honest lawmen in the territory. We just need to be smart about this. Over the next days, they prepared for siege. Calder taught her to shoot properly, setting up targets behind the barn. Her aim improved rapidly, driven by necessity and his patient instruction. You're a natural, he said after she put 3 shots in a tight group. Good eye, steady hands. Desperation is a fine teacher. He also showed her the defensive positions around the property, the places where one person could hold off many. It was sobering to realize he'd thought all this through long ago, preparing for enemies that might never come. The war, he explained when she asked. It never really leaves you. The need to know your ground, your advantages. At night, they lay together, still clothed, still careful of boundaries not yet crossed. But the intimacy was there in other ways. Shared stories, quiet laughter, the comfort of another heartbeat in the darkness. "Tell me about your family," she asked one night. "Before the war." So he painted pictures with words. A small farm in Ohio. Parents who valued education and hard work. Summer evenings on the porch with fireflies dancing. Thomas featured in every story. The beloved younger brother who'd wanted nothing more than to be like Calder. "He would have liked you," Calder said softly. "Would have teased me mercilessly about falling for a woman who held me at gunpoint. I think I would have liked him too. My parents, they might still be alive. I haven't written since I came here. Couldn't face their grief, their blame." "Maybe it's time," she suggested gently. "They lost both sons that day, in different ways. Maybe they'd want one back." He was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. "Then, maybe, after we're married, I'd like to tell them. I'd like to tell them I found happiness again." The next morning brought new challenges. The pregnant mare had gone into labor during the night, and it wasn't going well. Lila found Calder in the barn, sleeves rolled up, worry etched on his face. "Foal's turned wrong," he said tersely. "I can't manage alone. Not with—" He gestured at his bad leg. "Tell me what to do." For the next 2 hours, they worked together in intense partnership. Calder guided her hands, her strength compensating for his limited mobility. It was messy, difficult work. But finally, a wet bundle slid into the straw, a perfect bay filly with a white star on her forehead. "You did it," Calder breathed, wonder in his voice. "We did it." Lila was covered in blood and fluids, exhausted but exhilarated. "She's beautiful." The mare, recovered from her ordeal, nickered softly and began cleaning her baby. Calder pulled Lila against him, heedless of the mess. "You're amazing," he said. "Absolutely amazing. I'm a mess. A beautiful mess." He kissed her temple. "My beautiful mess. If you'll have me. Always," she promised, as if summoned by their happiness. Trouble arrived that afternoon. Not the marshal this time, but a lone rider under a white flag. Lila recognized him, James Worthington, Blackwood's lawyer. "Mr. Holt," Worthington called from a safe distance. "I come with a proposition from my client. Not interested," Calder replied flatly. "You might want to hear this. It concerns Miss Monroe's freedom." Against her better judgment, Lila stepped forward. "What does he want?" Worthington smiled. Oily and false. "Mr. Blackwood is willing to drop all charges. Forget this unfortunate incident. All you have to do, Miss Monroe, is return to Silver Creek and fulfill your original agreement. My agreement was for marriage. He's already married. There are other arrangements that could be made, comfortable arrangements. You'd want for nothing except dignity, honor, freedom. Those are luxuries women in your position can rarely afford." Calder's rifle was in his hands before Lila could blink. "Get off my land, now, and tell Blackwood if he sends one more messenger, they'll go back across a saddle." Worthington paled but managed to maintain his composure. "You're making a grave mistake, both of you. Mr. Blackwood is not a man who accepts rejection well." "Then he'll have to learn," Lila said. "I'm not property to be bargained for. I'm not a prize in his sick game. I'm a free woman, and I choose to stay here. With this crippled hermit, you could have so much more." The rifle boomed, the shot deliberately wide but close enough to make Worthington's horse dance. "Next one won't miss," Calder said calmly. The lawyer fled, spurring his horse down the muddy trail. Lila and Calder watched until he was gone. Then she turned to him. "It's going to get worse now, isn't it?" "Probably." He set the rifle aside, pulled her close. "Are you afraid?" She considered the question honestly. "Yes, but not enough to run. Not enough to leave you." "Good." He kissed her, fierce and possessive. Because I'm not letting you go. Not to Blackwood. Not to anyone. That night, the first of the spring rains began. They lay listening to it drum on the roof, washing away the last of the snow, opening the trails that would bring either salvation or destruction. Whatever comes, Lila whispered in the darkness. We face it together. Together, he agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted of hope and determination and the wild sweetness of love found in the most unexpected place. 3 days after Worthington's visit, they came. Lila woke to the sound of horses. Too many horses. Dawn was just breaking, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. But there was nothing beautiful about the armed men surrounding the cabin. Calder, she whispered, shaking him awake. He was alert instantly. Soldier's instincts intact. One look through the window told the story. Get dressed. Quickly. Take the rifle from behind the door. They'd drilled for this, but reality was different from preparation. Her hands shook as she pulled on clothes, checked the rifle's load. Outside, she counted at least 10 men, including Marshal Donnelly, but it was the figure dismounting from a black thoroughbred that made her blood run cold. Harrison Blackwood himself, even from a distance. She could see his satisfied smile, the expensive cut of his clothes. This was the man whose letters had promised her everything, whose lies had driven her to desperation. Halt, Donnelly called. We've got legal papers this time. Come out peaceable, and nobody needs to get hurt. Let me see these papers. Calder replied from beside the door. Judge Morrison signed them yesterday. Arrest warrant for Lila Monroe on charges of assault, theft, and prostitution. Prostitution? Lila gasped. Calder's jaw tightened. They're trying to destroy your reputation completely. Make it so no decent person will help you. Miss Monroe. Blackwood's cultured voice carried across the morning air. This has gone on long enough. Come out now, and I promise leniency. Continue this charade, and things will go badly for everyone involved. I've got nothing to say to you, Lila called back. No, not even when I tell you about the interesting information I've uncovered. About a certain incident in St. Louis involving a dead man and a young laundress who disappeared shortly after. Ice flooded Lila's veins. The incident he spoke of, a drunk who'd cornered her in an alley, whose head had hit the cobblestones when she'd pushed him away. She'd fled when he didn't get up, never knowing if he'd lived or died. That's right, Blackwood continued, satisfaction dripping from every word. Murder charges tend to follow a person. Miss Monroe, even to the territories. You're lying, Calder said, but Lila touched his arm. He's not, she whispered. There was a man. I didn't mean to hurt him. He was attacking me, but self-defense isn't murder. Try proving that when you're a poor woman and he was a merchant's son. Blackwood's voice came again. Surrender now, and that unfortunate history stays buried. Force my hand, and I'll see you hang for it. The trap was perfectly sprung. Fight. And even if they survived, she'd be hunted as a murderess. Surrender. And face whatever degradation Blackwood had planned. Give us a moment. Calder called out. 5 minutes. Donnelly agreed. Calder pulled her away from the door, his face fierce with determination. We're not giving up. Calder, you don't understand. If what he says is true, I don't care if you killed a dozen men in St. Louis. He gripped her shoulders. You're not going with him. Not while I draw breath. I won't be the cause of your death, and I won't be the cause of yours, which is what Blackwood intends, one way or another. He moved to the window, studying angles. There's another option. What? The old mine shaft, 1/4 mile up the mountain. If we can reach the horses, your leg, we'll manage. I fought on worse ground in worse condition. He handed her the ammunition pouch. When I give the signal, we go out the back. Stay low. Use the woodpile for cover. Can you do that? She nodded, throat tight with fear and love for this man, willing to risk everything for her. Time's up, Donnelly called. Miss Monroe needs a moment to gather her things. Calder replied, Unless you want her traveling in her nightclothes. Rough laughter from some of the men. 5 more minutes. The marshal agreed. But that's all. They used those minutes to prepare. Extra ammunition, water, what food they could carry. Calder strapped on his gun belt, looking more like the soldier he'd been. "Whatever happens," he said, checking his rifle one last time, "know that these weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. Don't talk like that. We're going to survive this." He kissed her, quick and fierce. "Yes, we are. Ready?" She nodded. "Now." They burst from the back door together. Shouts erupted immediately, but they'd gained precious seconds of surprise. The woodpile provided cover as they ran for the barn where the horses waited. Already saddled, Calder's foresight paying off. Gunfire cracked behind them. Wood exploded in splinters near Lila's head. She returned fire, not aiming to kill, but to force their attackers to take cover. They reached the horses, Calder boosting her up despite his bad leg. His face was gray with pain, but he swung into his own saddle with practiced ease. "Stop them!" Blackwood's voice rose above the chaos. More gunfire. Calder grunted, swaying in his saddle. Blood spread across his shoulder. "Calder! Ride!" he commanded, spurring his horse up the mountain trail. They rode hard, branches whipping at their faces. The sound of pursuit close behind. Calder led with the sureness of a man who knew every rock and tree, even wounded. He kept his saddle, guiding them through paths barely wide enough for the horses. The mine shaft appeared like salvation, a dark mouth in the mountainside, shored up with old timbers. They dismounted, Calder nearly falling before Lila caught him. "How bad?" she asked, examining his shoulder. "Clean through. I'll live." But his face was pale, sweat beading despite the cool morning. "Help me move these rocks." Together they created a rudimentary barricade at the mine entrance. It wouldn't stop determined men, but it would slow them. "They'll surround us," Lila said. "Let them. This shaft connects to the old Dixon mine. Comes out 2 miles north. By the time they figure that out, we'll be long gone." If Calder could make it that far. The blood was still flowing, his movements growing sluggish. Lila tore strips from her petticoat, packing the wound as best she could. Voices echoed from outside. Their pursuers had arrived. "Halt! You're trapped. Send the woman out, and we'll let you live." "Counteroffer," Calder called back, leaning against the mine wall for support. "You turn around and leave, and I won't collapse this whole mountainside on your heads." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Calder pointed to the support beams, many showing rot and damage. "These timbers are 40 years old. Wouldn't take much to bring it all down. Course, we'd die too, but at least we'd take you with us." Silence from outside. Then Blackwood's voice, closer now. "Miss Monroe, surely you see the futility of this. Whatever hold this cripple has on you." A shot rang out. Not from Calder, from Lila. The bullet struck rock inches from where Blackwood's voice had originated, sending him scrambling back. "The next one won't miss," she said coldly. "And for your information, the only hold he has on me is love. Something you wouldn't understand." "Love?" Blackwood laughed. "You've known him, what, 3 weeks? You'd throw your life away for that?" "I'd throw my life away for much less than what he's given me. Respect, kindness, the right to choose my own path." She helped Calder sit, keeping her rifle trained on the entrance. "You offered me nothing but degradation dressed up in pretty words. I offered you comfort, security. You offered me slavery." Movement outside. They were trying to flank the entrance. Calder struggled to his feet, pistol in hand. "Together?" he asked. "Together." They fired simultaneously, driving the attackers back. But their ammunition wouldn't last forever, and Calder was weakening. His shoulder bled through the makeshift bandage. Then, unexpectedly, new voices from outside, shouting, gunfire, but not directed at them. "What the hell?" Donnelly's voice, confused and angry. "Federal marshals! Everyone drop your weapons!" Lila's heart leaped. Real law, not Blackwood's bought men. The firefight outside intensified. Calder slumped against her, consciousness fading. "Hold on," she whispered. "Please, hold on." after what felt like hours but was probably minutes. A new voice called out, "Folks in the mine, this is Deputy U.S. Marshal Tom Garrett. You safe in there?" "We need help," Lila called. "Calder's been shot. We're coming in. Don't shoot." 3 men entered cautiously, lean, weathered types wearing federal badges. The leader, Garrett, took in the scene quickly. "Get Johnson," he ordered one of his men. "He's got medical training." Then to Lila, "You're Miss Monroe?" "Yes. We've been tracking Blackwood's operation for months. Took statements from 2 other women he'd deceived. When word came he was making a move on someone else, he shrugged. Figured it was time to act. They carried Calder out into sunlight where the deputy with medical knowledge worked on his shoulder. Blackwood stood in shackles, his fine clothes dusty, his arrogance replaced by fury. "This is a mistake," he snarled. "I have connections in Silver Creek." "Maybe," Garrett agreed. "But this is federal jurisdiction now. Mail fraud. Conspiracy. Attempted murder. You'll be lucky if you see sunlight again before you're old and gray." Donnelly and several others were also in custody. Some of Blackwood's hired guns had fled. Others lay groaning from wounds. Justice had come to Holt Ridge in the unlikely form of 3 tired federal officers who'd ridden through the night. "Will he live?" Lila asked the deputy working on Calder. "Should do. Bullet went clean through. Missed anything vital. He'll be sore for a while, but he's tough." Calder's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her face. "Did we win?" "We won," she assured him, smoothing his hair back. "It's over. Good." His hand found hers. "Hate to die before I married you." "You're not dying, you fool." "Feel like I am." But he was smiling. "Worth it, though. You're safe." Marshal Garrett cleared his throat. "Miss Monroe, I'll need a full statement. There's also the matter of an incident in St. Louis." "Self-defense," Calder said firmly, struggling to sit up. "Whatever happened, it was self-defense." "That's for investigators to determine, but—" Garrett's expression softened slightly. "Given what we've learned about Blackwood's operation, about the women he's hurt, I suspect any past incidents might be viewed in a new light." They made a strange procession back to the cabin, federal marshals, prisoners, and 2 battered survivors of a love story that had begun with a pointed gun and nearly ended with one. As the deputy finished properly bandaging Calder's shoulder, Lila heard Garrett questioning Blackwood. 3 other women that we know of," the marshal was saying. "How many others? How many lives ruined for your entertainment?" Blackwood's response was sullenly silent. "The Carlson girl killed herself," Garrett continued. 16 years old. Her family thought she'd found honest work in Silver Creek. Lila closed her eyes, thinking how easily that could have been her fate. Without Calder, without this strange sanctuary in the mountains, she might have been another casualty of Blackwood's cruel games. "Hey," Calder said softly, drawing her attention. "You all right?" "I'm thinking about the others, the ones who weren't lucky enough to find you." "You found me? Seem to recall you breaking into my house. Best crime I ever committed." She kissed him gently, mindful of his injuries. Garrett approached them. "We'll be taking Blackwood and the others back for trial. Miss Monroe, you'll need to testify, but given the circumstances, I see no reason you can't remain here until then." "What about the St. Louis matter?" Lila asked, needing to know. "I'll wire for information. But ma'am, if you were defending yourself against assault, and given what we've seen of the type of men who've been pursuing you—" He shrugged. "Justice isn't always blind, but sometimes she squints in the right direction." As the marshals prepared to leave with their prisoners, Blackwood managed one last moment of spite. "You think you've won?" he called to Lila. "You're nothing but trash who got lucky. He'll tire of you soon enough. And then what? You'll end up right where you belonged." Garrett's fist connected solidly with Blackwood's jaw, dropping him to the dirt. "Prisoner attempted escape," the marshal said calmly. "Had to subdue him. You both saw it, right?" "Absolutely." Calder agreed. "Clear as day." Lila added. They watched the group ride away. taking with them the shadow that had hung over their happiness. The sun was high now, warming the mountain air, melting the last patches of snow in sheltered corners. "So," Calder said, leaning against her, "still want to marry a broken-down soldier who gets into gunfights before breakfast? Only if he still wants to marry a desperate woman who holds people at gunpoint. Sounds like a perfect match to me." She helped him inside, settling him in his chair by the fire. There would be time later for plans and preparations, for healing and rebuilding. For now, it was enough to be safe, to be together, to have survived. "Lila?" Calder said as she busied herself making tea. "Yes? Thank you for not giving up, for not going with him." She turned, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. "Thank you for not letting me. I meant what I said, about these being the happiest weeks of my life. Mine too." She brought him the tea, sitting carefully beside him. "And we'll have more, years and years more." "Promise." "I promise." Outside, the world went on. Marshals riding toward justice, mountains standing eternal guard, new grass pushing through melting snow. But inside the cabin at Holt Ridge, two souls who had found each other against all odds held tight to their unexpected gift, knowing that sometimes the best love stories begin with the worst circumstances, and that happiness, once earned, is worth any price. The circuit preacher arrived 2 weeks after the shootout, just as the last of Calder's bandages came off. Reverend Josiah Mills was a spare man with kind eyes who'd been riding these mountain routes for 20 years, carrying God's word and human comfort to isolated souls. "Calder Holt," he said, dismounting from his dusty mare. "Been a while since you asked for my services." "Different circumstances now," Calder replied, his good arm around Lila's waist. The Reverend's gaze moved between them, taking in the way they stood together, the quiet happiness that seemed to radiate from both. "I heard there was some trouble up here, federal marshals and such. All resolved now," Lila said. "We're free to move forward." "Good. Hate to perform a wedding with guns pointed at me. Happened once down in Lincoln County. Very distracting." They'd prepared as best they could. Lila wore Rebecca's wedding dress, carefully altered and freshened. It felt strange at first, wearing a dead woman's gown. But Calder had insisted Rebecca would have wanted it used for happiness again. He wore his best shirt and trousers, hair trimmed, boots shined to a military gleam. The ceremony was simple, held in front of the fireplace with Santos from the trading post and his wife Maria as witnesses. They'd arrived that morning with supplies and congratulations. Maria bringing a cake she'd somehow managed to transport intact over the rough trails. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Mills began, and Lila felt tears prick her eyes. After everything, the betrayal, the fear, the violence, she was standing here beside a good man who loved her, making promises she intended to keep. Calder's voice was steady as he repeated his vows, but his hand trembled slightly as he slipped a simple gold band on her finger. His mother's ring. He'd told her, sent to him after Thomas died. He'd never thought to use it, had kept it locked away with other painful memories. When it came time for her vows, Lila spoke clearly, wanting everyone, wanting him, to hear the certainty in her voice. "I take you, Calder, for better or worse, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parts us. You may kiss your bride," the Reverend said with a smile. The kiss was sweet and full of promise, nothing like their desperate early embraces. This was the kiss of two people who'd faced the worst and chosen each other anyway. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reverend Mills announced to their small gathering, "I present Mr. and Mrs. Calder Holt." Maria burst into tears. Santos produced a bottle of good whiskey he'd been saving. Even the Reverend accepted a small glass for the toast. "To new beginnings," Santos said, raising his glass. "To second chances," Calder added, his eyes on Lila. "To love found in unexpected places," she finished. They drank, and for a moment, the cabin was full of warmth and laughter and the simple joy of good people celebrating happiness. But reality has a way of intruding on even the most perfect moments. As the Reverend prepared to leave, He pulled Calder aside. "There's talk in town," he said quietly. "About the trouble here, about Blackwood's arrest. Some folks aren't happy about it." "Blackwood's in federal custody," Calder pointed out. "His wife's family isn't, and they're powerful people, used to getting their way." The Reverend glanced at Lila, who was helping Maria clean up. "Just be careful, both of you." After the guests left, Lila and Calder stood alone in their cabin, their home now, truly theirs. The late afternoon sun slanted through windows she'd washed to sparkling, illuminating the small touches she'd added over the weeks: wildflowers in a jar, new curtains, the quilt from Rebecca's room now gracing the back of Calder's chair. "No regrets?" he asked, pulling her close. "Not one." She touched the ring on her finger, still marveling at its weight. "You?" "Only that I didn't meet you sooner. Could have saved us both some pain. Maybe we needed the pain to appreciate this." He kissed her forehead. "When did you get so wise?" "Somewhere between pointing a gun at you and saying, 'I do.'" That night, they came together as husband and wife with a tenderness born of trust, hard won. In the darkness, skin against skin, they wrote new stories over old scars. Calder's hands, so capable with horses and rifles, proved equally skilled at worship. Lila discovered that passion could be both fierce and gentle, that love made manifest in physical form could heal wounds words couldn't reach. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to night birds call and wind sigh through pines. "I never thought I'd have this again," Calder murmured against her hair. "Never thought I deserved it." "We both deserve happiness. Calder, we've earned it." "Have we? Sometimes I think about all the men I killed in the war, about Thomas, about Rebecca." "Stop." She placed a finger over his lips. "The past is done. We can't change it, can only choose how we move forward. And I choose this. I choose you. I choose us." He was quiet for a long moment, then pulled her closer. "How did I get so lucky?" "Lucky? I held you at gunpoint, remember? Best thing that ever happened to me." They fell asleep smiling. The following weeks passed in a blur of ordinary happiness. They worked side by side, Lila learning the rhythms of ranch life while Calder rediscovered the joy of sharing daily tasks. The new foal grew strong on wobbly legs. The garden Lila planted began to show green shoots. For the first time in 3 years, the Holt ranch felt alive. Then came the day Calder found her crying over the wash basin, sick for the 3rd morning in a row. "Lila?" He knelt beside her, face creased with worry. "What's wrong? Are you ill?" She laughed through her tears, a watery sound. "Not ill, at least, not the way you mean." Understanding dawned in his eyes. We're going to have a baby." The words felt enormous, impossible, wonderful. "I wasn't sure, but now—" He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "A baby. Our baby. Are you happy?" "Happy?" He pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Lila, you've given me everything. A reason to live, a home that feels like home again. And now this, I don't have words for what I feel. Scared might be one of them," she said. "I know I am. Terrified," he agreed. "But the good kind of terrified, the kind that means something wonderful is happening." They sat on the floor of their kitchen, holding each other, adjusting to this new reality. A child, new life in a place that had seen so much death. "We'll need to expand," Calder said. "Already planning. Add another room, maybe 2, and we'll need—" "Calder," she touched his face. "We have months to prepare. Right now, can we just be happy?" "Yes," he said, kissing her gently. "We can be happy." But happiness in the frontier was always fragile. 2 days later, Santos arrived with troubling news. "Blackwood's trial," he said, accepting coffee with a grim expression. "It's been moved to Silver Creek." "What?" Calder set down his cup hard enough to slosh. "It's supposed to be federal jurisdiction. Was, but his lawyers argued local crime should be tried locally. And with his father-in-law's influence? Santos shrugged. The federal boys weren't happy, but a judge agreed. Lila felt the blood drain from her face. A trial in Silver Creek, where Blackwood's family controlled everything, where his money could buy any verdict. When? Calder asked. 2 weeks. They'll want Mrs. Holt to testify. No. Calder's response was immediate. She's not going anywhere near that town. If she doesn't appear, they could issue a warrant, make her look guilty of something. I'll go, Lila said quietly. Both men turned to her in surprise. I'll testify. Those other women, the ones who didn't survive him, someone needs to speak for them. Lila, in your condition, I'm pregnant, not dying. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. She straightened her spine. I won't let him win by default. Won't let fear keep me from doing what's right. Calder's jaw worked. She could see the war in him, the need to protect her battling with respect for her autonomy. Finally, he nodded. Then we go together, armed and ready for anything. Santos leaned forward. There's more. Word is Blackwood's wife left him, took their children and went back east to her family. The scandal was too much. Good for her, Lila said fiercely. No woman should have to endure a husband like that. Makes him more dangerous, though, Santos warned. Man's lost everything. His reputation, his family, his freedom maybe. Desperate men do desperate things. After Santos left, Lila and Calder sat in heavy silence. The weight of coming ordeal pressed down like a physical thing. We could run, Calder said finally. Pack up, head further west. California maybe, or Oregon. Start fresh where nobody knows us. Is that what you want? He was quiet for a long moment. Part of me, yes, the part that's terrified of losing you, of losing our child before it's even born. But another part. He looked around the cabin, at the life they'd built. This is our home. We shouldn't have to leave it because of fear. Then we don't run. We face this, like we've faced everything else. She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. Together, he agreed, and she heard both fear and determination in his voice. They spent the next days preparing. Calder cleaned and oiled every weapon they owned. Lila practiced her testimony, determined to speak clearly and truthfully no matter what lawyers might throw at her. They arranged for neighbors to watch the ranch, made contingency plans in case things went wrong. The night before they were to leave, Calder found her standing at the window, watching stars wheel overhead. Can't sleep. Thinking about the future, about what kind of world we're bringing a child into. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, hands splaying protectively over her belly. A world where people like Blackwood exist, yes, but also a world where strangers become lovers, where broken people find healing, where justice sometimes prevails. You really believe that? About justice? I believe in us, in what we've built. That has to count for something. She leaned back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, she had this strong arms around her, new life growing within her, and love enough to face any storm. Tell me again how this ends, she whispered. With us growing old together, with children running through these rooms, with horses in the pasture and crops in the field and Sunday dinners with too much food. He kissed her neck, with happiness earned and defended and lived every single day. I like that ending. Then that's what we'll have, no matter what tomorrow brings. They stood there until the stars faded toward dawn. Two people who'd found each other through violence and desperation now facing their greatest test. In a few hours, they'd ride toward the town where Lila's nightmare had begun. But they'd ride together. And in the end, that made all the difference. The future stretched before them, uncertain and fraught with danger, but also full of promise, of possibility, of the fierce joy that comes from choosing love in a hard world. Whatever came next, they would meet it as they'd learned to meet everything, united, unafraid, and utterly committed to the life they'd built from the ashes of their separate sorrows. Silver Creek looked different in spring sunlight than it had in winter's desperation. The muddy streets had dried to dust. and respectable folk went about their business as if darkness didn't lurk behind prosperity's facade. Lila kept her head high as she and Calder rode down Main Street, though she could feel the stares, hear the whispers. That's her, the one who caused all the trouble. Living in sin up on that mountain before they married. I heard, poor Rebecca must be rolling in her grave. Calder's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes forward. They'd prepared for this. The social gauntlet that preceded the legal one. Marshal Garrett met them outside the courthouse, his expression grim. Glad you made it, he said, helping Lila dismount. Though I wish you hadn't had to. This whole thing stinks of corruption. We know, Calder said, but running would be worse. Maybe Blackwood's got himself quite the legal team. They're going to try to paint Mrs. Holt as a woman of loose morals who entrapped their client. Garrett's expression softened as he looked at Lila. I'm sorry for what you're about to endure. I've endured worse, she replied. The courthouse was packed. It seemed everyone in Silver Creek had come to witness the spectacle. Lila recognized some faces from her brief, terrible time in town, including the hotel clerk who'd propositioned her. He had the grace to look away when their eyes met. Blackwood sat at the defendant's table looking immaculate despite his time in custody. His dark eyes found Lila immediately, and the hatred there made her stomach turn. She placed a protective hand over her middle, where new life grew hidden and precious. All rise for the Honorable Judge Morrison, the same judge who'd signed the warrants against her. Lila's heart sank, but she stood straight, Calder's steady presence beside her anchoring her courage. The prosecutor, a nervous young man clearly out of his depth, presented the case against Blackwood. Mail fraud, conspiracy, attempted kidnapping. His voice shook as he outlined the pattern of deception. The women lured west with false promises. Then Blackwood's lawyer rose, Samuel Prescott, imported from Denver, smooth as oil and twice as slippery. Your Honor, my client is a respected businessman, a pillar of this community. These accusations stem from a misunderstanding with a woman of questionable character who, when her attempts to entrap him failed, turned to violence and seduction of other men. Objection, the prosecutor squeaked. Overruled. Continue. Mr. Prescott. And so it went. Every witness the prosecution brought. Prescott twisted their words. The other women who'd suffered under Blackwood's schemes were painted as fortune hunters. Marshal Garrett's testimony was dismissed as federal overreach. Then came Lila's turn. State your name for the record. Lila Monroe Holt. Mrs. Holt, is it true you traveled to Silver Creek expecting to marry my client? I traveled expecting to marry the man who'd written me letters proposing marriage. I learned upon arrival that man was already married. Perhaps you misunderstood the nature of the correspondence. Lila lifted her chin. I understood perfectly. Would you like me to recite from memory the promises he made about the house with glass windows, the respectable life, the children we'd raise? Anyone can claim memories. Mrs. Holt, do you have these alleged letters? Her heart sank. The letters had been in her carpet bag, lost when the mare ran off. No, but... So we have only your word. The word of a woman who, by her own admission, threatened several citizens with a firearm and fled justice. I defended myself against men who tried to assault me. Or perhaps you're simply prone to violence? Isn't it true you held Calder Holt at gunpoint? Objection. The prosecutor found his voice. Relevance. Goes to character. Your Honor. I'll allow it. Lila met Calder's eyes, drawing strength from the steady love there. Yes, I pointed a gun at the man who would become my husband. I was desperate, afraid, and alone. He showed me kindness anyway. That's the kind of man he is, the opposite of your client. How touching, and how convenient that you managed to ensnare a landowner so quickly after your schemes with my client failed. I didn't ensnare anyone. We fell in love. In a matter of weeks, while you were supposedly recovering from trauma. Prescott's smile was predatory. Come now, Mrs. Holt, you're an intelligent woman. You saw an opportunity with a lonely hermit and seized it. That's not... Isn't it true you're now pregnant with his child? Rather swift work for a woman supposedly seeking honest marriage. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Lila felt heat flood her face, but she refused to look down. My husband and I are expecting a child. Yes, that's what married people do. When they're actually married, not when they're playing house in the mountains for weeks beforehand. Objection. Even the mild prosecutor was angry now. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, Mr. Prescott. Stick to facts relevant to the case. But the damage was done. Lila left the witness stand feeling dirty, exposed. The respectability she'd fought so hard to achieve stripped away by clever words and nasty implications. The defense presented their case next. Blackwood himself took the stand, all wounded dignity and gentlemanly restraint. Miss Monroe, Mrs. Holt, misunderstood our correspondence. I was merely offering employment opportunities for women of ambition. If she read more into it. That's unfortunate, but hardly criminal. And the other women who've made similar claims? I've helped many young women find positions in Silver Creek. If some were disappointed by the reality of frontier life versus their fantasies, I can hardly be blamed for that. What about the assault charges? I've never laid hands on any woman. Ask anyone in this town about my character. I'm a family man, a church elder. These accusations are the desperate lies of a woman trying to justify her own criminal behavior. Lie after smooth lie, delivered with such conviction that Lila could see doubt creeping into some faces. This was Blackwood's town. After all, easier to believe the respectable businessman than the mail-order bride who'd caused such scandal. During a recess, Lila and Calder sat in a small room with Marshal Garrett and the prosecutor. It's not going well, the young lawyer admitted. Prescott's too skilled, and Judge Morrison, he trailed off helplessly, is bought and paid for, Garrett finished bluntly. Question is, what do we do about it? We tell the truth, Lila said. That's all we can do. Truth doesn't always win in court, Garrett warned. Especially not this court. Calder had been silent throughout, but now he stood. I need some air. Lila, stay with the marshal. Where are you going? Just outside. I'll be back before court resumes. But when court reconvened, Calder's seat was empty. Worry gnawed at Lila's as Prescott called his next witness, the hotel clerk. Mr. Jameson, you interacted with the defendant during her time in Silver Creek. Yes, sir. She came to my hotel, clearly desperate. I offered her honest work, and she pulled a gun on me. What kind of honest work? Cleaning, cooking, respectable employment. Another lie. Lila bit her tongue to keep from calling out. Then the courtroom doors opened, and Calder entered. But not alone. With him was an elderly woman in widow's weeds, her face carved by hardship but her bearing dignified. Behind them, two younger women Lila didn't recognize. Your Honor, Calder called out. These women have traveled from Meridian and Carson City to testify. They have direct knowledge of Blackwood's crimes. Judge Morrison's face darkened. This is highly irregular. The witness list was closed. Not for defense witnesses, Your Honor. Prescott interjected smoothly. But Lila caught the sharp look he gave Blackwood. If these women can shed light on my client's character, we welcome their testimony. The elderly woman was Margaret Donnelly. No relation to the marshal, she clarified acidly. Her daughter Emma had answered Blackwood's advertisement 3 years ago. She was 17. Mrs., Donnelly said, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. Wrote such happy letters at first about the man she'd marry, the life they'd build. Then the letters stopped. When I came looking, they told me she'd run off. Took me 6 months to find her body. Objection! Prescott was on his feet. There's no evidence linking. Let her speak, Judge Morrison said, surprising everyone. She was in a brothel outside town, had taken poison rather than continue. Mrs. Donnelly's voice broke. The madam told me how she'd gotten there. A man had promised marriage, then sold her when she refused his other offers. She described him perfectly. Dark hair, gold tooth, scar on his left hand from a riding accident. Every eye turned to Blackwood, to the thin white scar visible on his left hand. The other women told similar stories. Sisters, friends, daughters lured west and destroyed. Not all had died. Some had simply disappeared, too ashamed to go home, scattered to mining camps and frontier towns where women had few choices. This is hearsay, Prescott argued, but his polished veneer was cracking. Stories without proof? I have proof, the younger of the two women said quietly. She was perhaps 20, pretty despite the hardness in her eyes. I have his letters. Kept them all these years. Don't know why. Maybe waiting for this moment. She produced a packet tied with ribbon. The handwriting was compared to documents Blackwood had signed. Even Judge Morrison couldn't ignore the match. The courtroom had gone deadly quiet. Blackwood's support was evaporating as the true scope of his crimes became clear. These weren't fortune hunters or loose women. These were daughters, sisters, innocents destroyed by one man's cruel games. Your Honor, Marshal Garrett stood. In light of this testimony, the federal government requests jurisdiction be returned to our court. These crimes cross territorial boundaries. That won't be necessary, Judge Morrison said heavily. He looked old suddenly, shrunken. I've heard enough. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. As they led Blackwood away, he passed close to Lila. This isn't over, he hissed. Calder stepped between them. Yes, it is. You've hurt your last woman, destroyed your last life. Where you're going, the only person you'll be able to torment is yourself. Outside the courthouse, Lila breathed free air for what felt like the first time in hours. The women who'd testified clustered nearby, comforting each other. She went to them. Thank you, she said simply, for speaking up, for being brave. You were brave first, Mrs. Donnelly replied. Gave others courage to follow. As they prepared to leave Silver Creek, forever this time, Lila hoped. Marshal Garrett approached. That was well done, Holt, finding those women, bringing them here. They found me, Calder admitted. Word spreads. When they heard about the trial, about Lila standing up to him, they came on their own. I just provided transportation from the stage. Still, Garrett offered his hand. You're good people, both of you. That ranch of yours. It's a good place for a fresh start. For a family. That's the plan, Lila said, hand resting on her stomach. They rode home as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The trial was over. Justice served. The past finally laid to rest. Ahead lay only the future, uncertain as all futures are, but bright with promise. How are you feeling? Calder asked as their cabin came into view. Free, Lila said after a moment's thought. Truly free for the first time in my life. And our child will be born free. No shadows from the past, no lies to uncover. Just love and truth and the chance to become whoever they're meant to be. That's all anyone can ask for. That night, as they lay in their bed, their marriage bed, consecrated by law and love and shared trials, Lila felt the first flutter of movement in her womb. Tiny, barely there, but unmistakably real. Calder, she breathed, guiding his hand to the spot. They waited, breathing suspended, until it came again. The smallest movement, but profound as an earthquake. New life asserting itself, making its presence known. Our child, he whispered, wonder in his voice. Our future, she corrected, and kissed him as the stars wheeled overhead and the world turned toward tomorrow. They had traveled hard roads to reach this moment, betrayal and violence, loneliness and despair. But every step had led here, to this cabin in the mountains where love had bloomed unlikely as wildflowers in stone, where a desperate woman with a gun had found not just shelter but home, where a broken soldier had remembered how to hope. The wind sang through the pines, carrying the scent of spring and growing things. Inside, two hearts beat as one, soon to be three. And in that simple arithmetic lay all the magic in the world. The magic of love triumphant, of second chances seized, of happiness earned through courage and held through faith. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would meet it together. And that, in the end, was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Lila and Calder's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening to this story from? I'd love to know. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more tales of love, adventure, and redemption in the American frontier. Your thoughts and feelings about this story mean the world to me. So please share them in the comments. Until our next adventure, partners.